Hey, Casey. How's it going?
Good to see you, man.
Good to see you.
Too.
So, what do we got going on here?
Welcome to the shop.
Awesome. So, you're going to be talking about a bunch of things for us today. I can't wait to ask you some questions, hear what you have to say about it. But I know a lot of our viewers are going to be really into the tools you have. So, why don't we just go ahead and start right here with a shop tour? You can explain a little bit of everything here for us, and we can work through your shop, and then we can get to the meat of everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it. These are big industrial grinders. They're big heavyweights. Horsepower-wise, they're pretty good. They're 3 horse, most of them. Actually, one of them is a 2 horse. The rest are 3 horsepower motors, so you cannot slow them down.
Okay.
Easily.
So this is more of like a factory grade.
Yeah,
grinder.
Some of these came out of some of the old aerospace firms.
Okay.
So, and I've always bought them used. They're very expensive machines. They still make the exact same model today. All the attachments, all the parts, it's still used in big industry. But they run a longer belt than most knife makers use. Most knife makers use a 2x72,
right.
2x60 sometimes. These are 2x132 inch.
Oh, wow.
So when you buy the belts, yeah, they last longer, but they're
considerably more expensive.
They're more expensive, and you have to buy usually a case quantity at a time. So
oh, wow.
That's the limiting factor with these. But
so in other words, use the belts sparingly.
Yeah, but they cut longer.
True.
So it's kind of it works out. It's just when you have to buy the belts for them, it's ouch.
Right.
And then moving on, Tormek. I guess shout out to Tormek. It's a really nice sharpener. It's got a diamond wheel on it. Does a great job at sharpening.
I really want one of those.
It's slow.
I've been drooling over them.
They're really nice. You can get an edge that's just unbelievable on them. And accurate, consistent. It's just a little slower. So for more of the production stuff, when I had hundreds of knives to do, that took too long.
Okay.
I'm not knocking the machine. It's a fantastic machine. I love it. I still use it. This I imported from Spain, the Temeca Osorio Industries. They
Never even seen one.
Yeah, they make bevel grinders, but it's a wet grinder. So it uses, it's a standard Cubitron belt on there.
Right.
It's a 400 grit that I'm using that I like. There are other grits that people like, but this one is completely all stainless steel. It's a really, really well-built machine, and it runs the belt wet.
Okay, so that's why it's all stainless.
Yeah. I got that. There it goes. You got that. And belt's running that way. So you're sharpening this way. And you can sharpen on the wheel itself, the platen, or the slack area.
Oh, okay.
So when you're doing production sharpening on you got a lot of knives to do. Along with the coolant, you don't have to worry about burning your edges.
Right, so you're not gonna decarb the edge.
Not at all. Completely cool. So this
That's
machine
pretty
has been a lifesaver.
Oh yeah, I bet. It looks nice.
Yeah, and it's so well built. They're entering the American market.
I'll have to keep my eyes out for
Yeah,
one of
I've got
those.
good contacts, so I know a guy. But yeah, each of the, as far as these belt grinders go, they're all set up for different things.
I can see that. You got a platen, contact wheel, rotary platen, long platen.
Long platen I use for the swords. Because
Okay.
if you want to get a straight edge, nothing better than doing that to get your edges parallel.
Oh, okay. That
And
makes
then-
sense.
And then I also, after running on the flat platen, I come over here and run them that way as well. So I can get lengthwise grind lines. You know, from small wheel, and then those two are for whatever. You know,
Kind of
different,
configure them for whatever you happen to need
Yeah.
that these might not do.
yeah, different size. Like if you go to, the nice thing about the baiters, they, for let's say I want to run a 12-inch contact wheel, there it is. I don't have to do anything. It just drops in.
Wow.
And so they're really nice machines. They're just very big. They take up a lot of space. As you can see, I think this wall's 26 feet long. And these are spaced for me to work on swords. And they're still not spaced far enough because, you know, when you count the blade and the tang,
Right.
sometimes I'll have to take off an attachment just so I can run the blade. But yeah, no, these are great machines. And then moving on, these are the two tumblers.
Oh, okay.
So if you take a look at this one. So I can fire it up so you can see what it looks like when it goes. And that's just for tumbling.
So this would be for, in your application, more for deburring, smoothing over hard corners, things like that.
They'll do all of that. You can, yeah, there's a fluid that comes in here as well.
Right.
It runs it with the fluid. Once I get to, say, a 500 grit finish on one of the buffing wheels, I'll come into here.
Give a stone wash.
It gives a stone wash. And
Okay.
with the particular media I'm using right now, it gives almost a mirror polish.
Oh,
wow.
wow.
It just takes, you know, it's in there for 4 to 6 hours.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you've got the knife ovens.
Yes. Yeah, Even Heat made this for me, God, a long time ago. This is the biggest one they would make me. So it's 54 inches deep inside. And as you can see, I've carved a hole in it because I had some swords that were longer. So the tangs were sticking out. But, and then I got the little guy.
Does this have two controllers?
No, it's just one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's got one controller, but I guess that's the other power pack on it, the other relay for the other coil. But yeah, great machine. I've had this for literally, I think I bought it in 05.
Oh,
I
wow.
wanna say. So, and it's still trucking along. So, great machine. Then we have the molten salt tanks. These I've designed and built. This is generation, I don't know, 3.0, 4.0, 8.0, something like that. So that salt right now is at 523 degrees Fahrenheit. So that is molten salt, and that's what the blades get quenched into. Quenched and tempered. So you can quench, I have them all running right now, all four. I built these for batch heat treating for doing large volume.
Okay.
But it's also nice, you've got redundancy. So if your tank goes down, oh, that's fine, I got another one.
And I would imagine with the salt, because you're in a liquid state, when you're getting up to these higher temperatures, you're not going to build up scale or anything like that because you're in a completely oxygen-free environment.
Right, especially when you come from high temp salts. Like these salts, this one runs up to about 1650 degrees Fahrenheit. Usually don't use it past 15. This one will run up to 2150. So I can do stainless steel heat treating in this. This I use if I'm doing, say, stainless steel, which needs higher temperatures to harden. I'll use this as a preheat. So you've got a preheat, helps de-stress
That way,
the
yeah,
steel.
you get up to the normalization in your ramp up.
Yeah, exactly. You got it in here for who knows how long because you're not into that hardening zone. You're not in that austenitizing zone. So it's sitting here at 1500. Put it in here, and it's at 2000 right now because it's already hot. So you're not putting a cold blade into that. Then from here, gets quenched into one of the salts at specified temperature. Then it comes out, and depending on how thin it is, it might go into that plate press. Then it goes over here, and I do not do a snap temper. So then it goes into liquid nitrogen. So, and these are fairly large tanks. So I can put blades in there. Goes into the liquid nitrogen for X amount of hours. Then out of there, air cooled. Then it goes back to the salt for temper.
Okay.
So you get absolutely clean blades. They come out, they look like they've been blued. You know,
wow.
there might be a little oxidation on them. Not much, more like a cold blue process.
Okay.
So you get nice clean blades, very stress-free when you're hardening them, which is better because salt skips the vapor barrier. When you quench something into, say, water, brine, which is salty.
You get that steam layer around it.
Yeah, it's a steam jacket. They call it the vapor barrier. And that's where you start getting warpage.
Right.
You know, one side of the blade has direct contact with water, the other one has a vapor barrier on another side. And that's where you get warpage on your blades.
Right.
With salt, there is no vapor barrier.
Oh, okay.
It goes right in, so it's an immediate heat extraction.
Right.
So if you have the right alloys that respond to salt, not all alloys will work for salt, especially if you're using like the 10 series steels that many people use and are familiar with. Unless it's super thin, you're not going to heat treat in salt very well. That's where you need a fast oil or something like that. But for the alloys I use, they're perfect for salt.
So this is the big boy.
Yes.
This is your crown jewel, you might say.
It's my baby. So yeah, this was bigger than the dream hammer I had. You know, when I was thinking about it 30 years ago, I remember Knives Illustrated, and I saw one of the bladesmiths, he had a Nasal 3B. This is a 4N, so this is much larger than a 3.
And we're going to get to see this work today, correct?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
We're going to
I
smash
can't
some
wait
stuff
for
with
that.
that.
And then, of course, your pizza oven.
Yeah, it's a little warmer. You know, it gets warm. This runs on natural gas. I have a high pressure commercial gas, so I don't have to worry about propane tanks or anything.
How hot does something like this get?
This particular design, it will get hot enough to ruin steel. So,
Okay.
Yeah, so
So you're going beyond welding temperature.
Yeah, it'll get 2600 if I let it.
Oh.
Sometimes I have to back it off because it tends to get too hot. Takes a little while to heat up, about an hour, hour and a half, to get up to working temperature.
Right.
This one's been trucking along with minor repairs for the last 12 years or so.
Oh, very nice.
Oh,
It looks well built
thanks.
and highly customized.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's a 100% custom job there. A few changes for the next one.
Right.
Down the road. Because eventually, you got to look at furnaces. They're consumables.
Right.
They die.
Yeah.
And you got to build a new one. So
And what do we have here?
then we've got the hydraulic press. This is call it 36, or it depends on the pressure I'm running it at, but it's a 40-ton press. It's a 7.5 horsepower, real 7.5 horsepower motor that runs it relatively fast. For hydraulic presses, this thing's fast. And I use it in conjunction with the big hammer. They really complement each other.
Okay.
This stretches steel out. This one flattens it. It stretches it out too, but the dies are different. So I use them both interchangeably. Great machine. I built this back in the late 1990s. Actually, it was a design I built. So great machine. And then onto this little guy. This is a Little Giant power hammer.
Okay.
Frame.
I was going to say, it doesn't look like your typical Little Giant.
No, the frame is a Little Giant, but then I changed it to run on an air system. So it's based on the Kenyon air hammer, or the Kenyon simple air hammer. So it runs on that. It's a 2.5-inch cylinder.
So you're not going to get that classic Little Giant mechanical sound.
No, it just runs on compressed air, and like for people that are watching Forge and Fire, they have Big Blue.
Right.
That's about it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's maybe a little lighter than Big Blue, but it's got a better frame.
Right.
So This is what I use for most of my shaping of my blades.
Okay.
You know, in conjunction with the anvil,
Right.
of course, and a hand hammer, but a lot of it's
Well,
done
you'll have to
on
show
that
us
little
this
guy.
in action a little later.
Yeah, for sure. Show you how we stretch out bevels.
So, and then of course, the trusty anvil.
Yep, that is a 176-pound Peter Wright.
Oh, a Peter Wright.
It's in really good shape. It's good anvil. There are quite a few scars on it.
Yeah, but that can be, there's guys that can dress that out, no problem.
Yeah, I honestly don't see a need to for what I'm doing.
I imagine if
fine.
you were forging down to almost final shape,
Yeah,
it would make a difference.
You want that
but-
mirror polish surface.
Right.
I've had this. I got this when I was 18 years old. So I've had that. I don't know. How old am I now? I've had this for 33 years.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not saying how old you are because
Yeah,
that'll
it's
tell
a-
everybody how old I am.
Yeah, it's okay. So yeah, that was my one tool my dad wanted to buy me. He said I couldn't screw up. Then I taught him. I'm like, hey, Dad, actually, you can screw up an anvil. They're more fragile than you think.
Very
So,
cool.
Yeah.
So what else do you got going on in here?
We got the first press I built. That's a 16-ton. I use it for drifting. A lot of little things,
Small parts.
small parts, stuff like that. That's the beginning of a pommel I use. It's called a scent stopper pommel for a longsword.
Oh, okay.
So you can see the die that's on there right
Oh
now.
yeah, so it just,
Heat it up and stretch it out. And a lot of the pommels I do on swords are hollow, which is traditionally accurate.
that I didn't know for you or for
Yeah.
historical pieces.
Yeah, so, when I hand you a big longsword that weighs 2.5 pounds, people are like, how is that possible? Well, the pommel isn't necessarily a counterweight. It can be, but if you get the blade right, you don't need all that weight.
Okay.
So that's how you keep the blade weight down. And if you look at a lot of the historical pieces, they used silver solder or brazed, sometimes forge welded, but they were hollow. A lot of them. Not all, but a
Right.
lot were. So it's an older CNC, but I updated it and added the so you can put a thumb drive in it, so you can load whatever you want on, say, Fusion 360 or CAD CAM, whatever you're using. I'm using
Right.
Fusion 360. Plug the thumb drive in, and it's good to go. And as far as it comes to running a lot of this big equipment, over here is the phase converter, and that big kicker motor down there is a 60 horse. So it allows me to run up to a 30 horsepower motor in the shop.
Oh wow.
Maybe a little bit more. It generates the third leg of the 3-phase power that you need for a lot of the big equipment. And the motor on this mill is 15 horsepower. Motor on the hammer is 15 horse. I cannot run them together. I think the computer freaks out when I
Your
turn on the
breaker
hammer.
panel must be insane.
Breaker panel's okay. I've got a 400 amp in-feed along with a ton of solar because of where we live. It's kind
Right.
of necessary. But the 3-phase runs on a 150 amp breaker. And I think when I turn the hammer on and this is running, I think it's that surge that the computer freaks out and just
Right.
shuts down.
That peak.
So it's like you're running one or the other.
Right.
Pick your poison.
So what are these beasts? I'm not
these are-
familiar with these.
These are super rare. They came out of the Imperial Schrade factory when they bankrupted in 2004.
So like Schrade cutlery, Uncle
Schrade
Henry,
cutlery.
old timer.
Yep.
Okay.
And once I cleaned them, I still have a bunch of blanks. Old timer, and some of the other blades that were just down in the chute.
Right.
That when I cleaned everything out, it was like I'm finding all these old timers and
Yep.
stuff. We're physically ground on these machines.
Oh wow.
But they were in storage from 2004 until I got them a few years ago. And I had to have a mechatronics engineer come in. Luckily, the original coding was in the memory still, which it shouldn't have been, but it was. So for a lot of money, he was able to, we changed out all the fuses, to switch them over to breakers, put new programmable logic circuit controls in, new motors to adjust. But what these machines do is they grind a left and a right side of the blade. So you put the blades in, it hydraulically pushes it in, but they're very difficult to set up. So once you have a machine set up, you don't want to change it.
Right.
Because you're going to spend a day or two
Dialing it.
Yeah, dialing
back
it in.
What are your intents with once you get them to work?
The intent was to do, I shouldn't say lower cost, but more affordable production knives. Same quality. It's just they can take away a lot of my hand grinding.
Sort of automating a step, but keeping it in-house.
Exactly.
Okay.
And you know, the ultimate way to go would be a brand new CNC bevel grinder. And the bevels are, you know, the edges of your blade. Those have to be ground. That would be the ultimate step. But once you start playing in that territory, you're in $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 for a machine like that.
Right.
These are the intermediary step.
That's child's play. I probably got that under the
Yeah, actually, I might.
couch cushions or in the center
Exactly.
console of my car.
Exactly. So
I'll help you out.
yeah, thanks. But yeah, no, they're great machines. Yeah, and I've rewired them so they're set for 15s if I have to replace those motors. I think the bearings are going on them. But it's still, you can stall them because it's taking a bevel, what takes us as knife makers sometimes an hour or two at a grinder, slowly grinding away a little bit of bevel. This does it in one pass, and it comes off finished.
Oh, wow.
So it's a finished piece ready for bead blasting or right into the tumbler. At least that's the plan.
Right.
So they're,
Well, it sounds
Really?
like you're getting there on it.
yeah, it's getting there. It's just, they've been a frustrating thing, but I'm learning them as I go. So they're not ready yet.
Right.
You know, we're getting there.
I saw you had some projects going over here. Would you care to show us?
I do.
All right.
Yeah. These are cleavers, but they're designed for slicing.
Okay.
They can cut, they can hit bone. These are going through my friend Adam Perry Lang, who's master barbecue. He's in the Barbecue Hall of Fame. The guy's awesome. But these are
Wow.
thin slicing cleavers. So they can be used for chopping, not their primary function, because you can see how thin that blade is.
Right.
It's designed for slicing. So these are a project in the work. This is the first batch, and every single one of them is individually heat treated, one at a time, ground by hand, not being done on a big machine, just me.
Oh, wow.
So,
Definitely keep an eye on your fingers while using them.
oh yes,
sort of
terrifying
situation.
knife. And then, you know, some of my chef's knives, blanks that I started making a while ago. I've got
Okay.
a few more to finish up, but those will hopefully be back up on the website eventually.
Awesome. And then I see you have some swords over here, which is the real cool factor.
Yeah. Now, actually, typically, I don't have swords in the shop. It's,
Okay.
as soon as one's done,
It's out on its way to the
it's
customer.
on its way. Yeah, so it's rare that I have one. This one came back as he got a little rust patina on the
Right.
blade, probably from the sheath, maybe. That could have kept moisture in and caused a little rusting. So I got to clean it up. I made the blade for this one. This hilt is called the Scivona, and it was real popular in the 1500s,
Yeah.
Italy.
One of my
Bam.
favorite designs.
Oh, it's beautiful. And shout out to Ugo Serrano, who made this hilt. So this is Ugo's. So it's a collaborative effort between Ugo's work and mine. And, you know, it's Damascus blade. Not exactly typical of a Scivona, that particular blade.
Right.
But it was a blade my friend wanted.
Right.
Or customer, friend. He's a friend.
May I?
Yeah, please. And he's a hard use customer. So he physically uses these blades and does horrible things to them. So, and he keeps buying my blades, so
Oh, that says something.
they hold up.
Very
and
nice.
it's beautiful work on the hilt that Ugo did. It's just
Oh, yes.
incredible.
Absolutely gorgeous.
And I think he did the sheath as well. And I've got Yeah, it's funny with
Beautiful
sheaths. You
work.
can spend more on a sheath than you can on a blade sometimes.
That's crazy.
The intricate metal work that goes into them, and that was the thing that medieval times. You know, everyone thinks it was dark and drab, and no, they were all about Viking times as well. They were all about color. And
wow.
It was all about bright colors and clothing, flashy. So
Right.
you wanted your sheath as flashy as you could make it. A lot of them were painted.
Yeah, I was really surprised the first time I saw accurate reproductions of the clothing Vikings really wore during the era of the sagas. It's not like the TV show,
No.
not even close. In fact, a lot of people would be like, they look like that?
Yeah, it
And
was
they
like
were badass?
yeah, they weren't wearing burlap sacks.
Right.
Basically. Then you get, when we were talking about Persian, this isn't exactly what I would call a Persian, but I would call it a multi-bar composite. It's 3 bars, left, right, left, or right, left, right, twisted and then welded back to itself. So that's one of the patterns you can get with that type of blade.
Very beautiful. And so incredibly light.
Yeah, they were. It's funny. I heard I took a class years ago with Kevin Cashin. He's one of the master smiths in the ABS, American Bladesmithing Society, and he was talking about he's documented and recorded over 100 of these things. Going to England, sitting down. They call it a mingaush.
Right.
I'm not sure if I got the pronunciation right, but it's a left-hand dagger, so it was fought in conjunction with a rapier.
Right.
You would block with it, stab with it, and use it both hands. You got a blade in each.
Yeah, I think they call that style of fighting Florentine.
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah.
And when people talk about tactical knives, that was the original tactical knife. That was a fighting knife.
Right. Well,
Pure and
like,
simple.
well, I believe it was the Roman spatha had a blade pattern that lasted well into the late medieval and even early Renaissance.
You can look at some spatha and think it's from the late medieval period. The blade shape hasn't changed that much.
Right,
It's
because
been around a long
if it isn't
time.
broke, why fix it?
Exactly.
You know?
And it worked.
Right.
When you look at Viking swords, this one isn't pattern welded. It's homogeneous steel, but you can see how the tip is real spatulate.
Right.
It's rounded. These were slashing weapons. You could thrust with it, but the fighting style wasn't that.
So
It
you
was
wanted that
slashing.
tip curved so that the tip could exit in a slash.
Possibly, yeah. I've seen that too with swords called Katzbalgers. It's like a figure 8 guard,
Right.
real short blade. Well, that was used by the pikemen who had big giant 14 or 18-foot pikes. They would get in. Now when you're in the crush and everyone's fighting, you had this short sword that you could work in tight quarters.
Right.
A big old long sword.
The original CQB.
Yeah. The original longsword, like this, of course, doesn't have a hilt or anything. That's a cumbersome weapon.
Right.
If you're in a tight crunch, you're not going to be able to use this effectively. But if you look and you see, as Middle Ages went on, you look at how armor developed,
Right.
and you went away from mail, which would be just rings of iron or steel. Then you got into developed plate armor. Swords started getting pointier and thicker because you needed a thrust.
Right.
So the use of them changed over time.
Right. And I imagine the points and angles on that armor was for the purpose of deflection rather than relying solely on the strength of the steel to resist penetration.
Yeah, well, and also, as I understand, with the Katzbalger, it had a round, every example, it has a rounded point. Like, why does it have a rounded point? And I read something, I can't confirm, but that the armor at the time had a bunch of lips on it, and a point could stick, could get caught. So if you didn't get anywhere slashing, at least your blade wasn't going to hang up in the armor. At least
Right.
that's one theory I heard. So there are reasons why they made blades like they did.
Okay.
In the Viking Age, it wasn't going up against much armor. It was going up against people, which are soft
Right.
and squishy, and they cut. So hence the development and the change in blade shapes.
Right. Very nice. And what do we have here? I see two knives rather than swords.
This is just a little hunter I did a while ago.
Damascus.
And that's going to go out to one of my customers.
Very nice.
Just, you know, it's funny, the blade shapes haven't changed in centuries.
No,
Thousands
that's
of
comfy
years.
in the hand.
Thanks. And then this is the last one right now. I got to put it up on the website, but that's antique micarta handle scales, and it's an ABL stainless blade, so that's one of my chef's knives. And that's actually a knife I have in the house right now and I use daily.
And this is the Westinghouse micarta?
Yeah, I believe it's Westinghouse, but
That's
it is
good
definitely
stuff.
antique.
This has a very light, fast blade. Very sharp.
And I've been using one for a few years in the kitchen. I cook a lot, so I'm serious about my cooking.
Right.
So I use it literally daily,
Awesome.
and it's been holding up great.
So,
Yeah.
what's the last thing you'd like to show us in the shop tour here?
Well, we've got, you know, leather stitcher, which I'm not using at the moment, but it's a nice one. It's a union lock stitch, so it makes I
Looks
think
heavy duty.
it's the same one. They've been making it for like 125 years. I can still order parts for that thing.
Oh, wow.
And the stitches are identical on both sides, so it's a lock stitch. If you have to take the stitches out, you have to cut every individual one.
Oh, wow.
So if you lose a stitch, it's the same machine they used to sew Wilson footballs,
Oh, okay.
as I was told. And then honestly, really important piece of equipment is the Rockwell tester.
So that you can verify all your hardnesses.
I can play with math and look at the time temperature transformation diagrams on the steels. I can get the chemistry of the steel, and I can use math,
Right.
which I'm not very good at. But I can figure out roughly, okay, at this temperature I should get this hardness. If I'm nailing that, okay, then I'm good. But having a Rockwell tester is so important. I mean, it's only one aspect of heat treating,
Right.
but it really gives a good indicator if, okay, your temperatures are good, you got this nailed, you know, hey, might need to tweak it a little bit. So we could test a blade. Yeah, it's really a simple machine. This is an older one. This is a Wilson, but it's, well, needs to be recalibrated. It's certified and calibrated by a calibration company. That's who
Okay.
I ended up getting it from. They're the same company that services like SpaceX, things like that in the area. So this machine is dialed in. There's no guesswork. Normally I'm standing in front of it, but we can do it this way.
We just set it up in the machine there,
Yeah.
and
Rockwell test is giving you an indication on penetration,
Okay.
depth of penetration. That's what it's measuring. And it's measuring thousandths of an inch. So there's a major and a minor load placed on this right now. I'm going to release I believe it's the major load. And it's going to push that little diamond into the steel. Then we'll put the minor load on it. And it's telling me that's at, what does that read, 60 Rockwell? And that's right where I wanted to hit for this particular blade steel.
and which blade steel is this?
This one is S30V. I was running some tests on it for a prototype knife, and pretty happy with the results.
All right,
where I
cool.
wanted it.
And that's a popular steel, you know. Of course, they brought in new iterations of it, but for a long time, that was the king of pocket knife steels.
Yeah, it's a great steel, and if you get your heat treatment right, you get the hardness right where it should be, you're gonna nail it.
So there's the major load.
Yep. And then wait a couple seconds until it's ready, and then minor load. So we're at 61, right at 61 Rockwell.
That's the sweet spot.
And that's the actual handle.
And
portion.
And what steel was that again?
This one's S30V.
All right.
I was running some experiments, playing with it, seeing if it's something I want to start using.
Yeah, and that's a very popular steel, and it looks like it's right where it was supposed to be.
Yeah, and that's why the Rockwell tester is so important.
Right.
Because it really lets you nail your heat treatments.
Well, thank you for showing us, because like I said, I think a lot of people, we all see in the knife catalogs and in articles, you know, oh, HRC, you know, 68, or, you know, for the new steels, or 59, 60, 60, 61, or buck with, you know, 56, 58. but it doesn't, nobody really always knows what exactly is involved in that. So this was kind of neat to be able to show people.
Well, the Rockwell test is one measure of what you have going on with the steel. There are tricks that can be played, heat treating firms, things like that, where they can get you the right result, not guaranteeing that your microstructure in your steel is right. I mean, there's, you know, I could heat that thing up higher than its temperature, lower the hardness. But I know I went through all my thermal cycling with it, and I went through a full cryo quench in liquid nitrogen. So I completed the hardening process, and this just confirms it.
Yeah.
It helps confirm it. It's a major piece.
Awesome. Well, I think it's time we start up some of your equipment and we show them, you know, what you do.
Yeah, play with some fire.
Yep. All right.
Thanks, Mark.
So what are you doing here?
So I'm going to stretch this out into a flat bar that we can stack with other steels, the other steel.
All right.
This currently is L6. Then we're going to stack it with 52-100 and make our first layered weld of Damascus, or pattern weld.
Awesome. That thing really packs a punch.
Now from here, we're going to go off to the press, stretch it out lengthwise, then come back to the hammer to make that flat bar at the thickness we want.
All right. So now you're going to refine the shape?
What's that?
Now you're going to refine the shape?
Correct.
Okay. That block there prevents the hammer from over striking.
Yeah, I want a 2-inch wide bar.
All right.
So I'm not overly concerned about thickness. I just need it 2 inches wide.
All right.
To match the other steel.
That's crazy how fast it works such a big piece of steel.
What's that?
That's crazy how fast it works such a big piece of steel.
This thing is a monster.
How heavy is the hammerhead on this?
600 pounds is
And the
what it's
anvil?
rated as. It's about a 390 pound.
Okay. And the
Well,
anvil?
maybe 490. But it's rated as a 600 pound steam hammer. And that's so years ago, I could have only have dreamed of having this kind of power.
Yeah, this is a very impressive hammer.
It does stuff in, literally, it's not, you know, we talk, how many heats does it take you to work a piece of steel? No, this one is how many hits does it take to work a piece of steel? So, and the steel I'm working, L6, if you were trying to do that by hand, oh, you'd die.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not easy to work. This thing just makes mincemeat of it.
Right. It's quite the impressive hammer. I mean, it just moves metal like nothing I've seen before.
You know, and in all reality, compared to real hammermen, guys that use these on an industrial basis, I'm an amateur. Honestly, this, I probably don't use it as it can be used. There are so many different tricks and techniques. Also, I'm working with really large flat dies, so it's limited on what it can do. That's why I go to the press for drawing out.
Okay.
You know, those dies are rounded, so it stretches the metal in one direction rather than blows it out all directions,
okay,
like the flat dies do. But using the press, that's a 40-ton press. It's extremely fast, or relatively fast. It's a fast press for its weight category. So it moves the metal really fast. I can stretch it out, heat it up again, and boom.
You can work a billet really quickly.
But I think this thing, complemented with the press, it's just fantastic. So now what I've done is I brought that bar down. It's about 1/2 inch thick. I mean, I can put another sizing block in there, or stop block we call them. I could put that in there to get the exact dimensions, but I'm really not worried about it.
Okay.
I need to get it roughly thinner than the 52-100 that I'm going to mix with it. So you can fudge that. You weigh the L6, you weigh the 52-100, and that you can figure out your generalized carbon content.
Right.
So that's what we're doing with this one.
Okay.
And that's basically the breakdown. As far as Damascus goes, it's the exact same thing.
Right.
You got a stack of layered steel, like a deck of cards. You know, usually I'll start with 5 layers, sometimes 7, depends. And those get forged, welded together. They're one homogeneous piece of steel. And at these temperatures, that carbon, you know, difference between the two steels, that carbon moves millimeters a second.
Right.
So it homogenizes.
Very cool.
But you get 2 different steels that are different alloys.
So, yeah. So, I imagine they don't make anything like this hammer anymore.
No.
What exactly is it?
This is a Nasal 4N. They made the most common are the B series, and those were what they called utility hammers. They have a bigger working height, same stroke, but you don't have these big giant guides in the way.
Okay.
This one was made for triple shifting. 24 hours a day, this thing was probably running.
Oh, wow.
You had 3 shifts coming in, 8 hours a day, non-stop, so it's a heavier frame. There's only 2 that I know in existence. One blacksmith shop owns, I think it was a motorcycle guy, Jesse James, owned it, got it from Washington. It ended up going to someone else because he moved up to like this massive Chambersburg. The Nasals, I think, are a better hammer. They run on a lower RPM motor, big flywheel, whereas the Chambersburgs run on gear drive.
Right.
And they're really loud. This one's actually, for what it is, it's relatively quiet. Nasal it's a German make. And as far as I understand, I think the patent is 1903 or 1905.
Oh, wow.
Best guess on this one, based on its serial number, probably around 1910, 1912 is when it was built.
So over 100 years old.
Yeah,
That's
well
impressive.
over 100 years old. And other than getting the motor rebuilt, which was an addition that was added on later, that's not the original. I think this thing ran on a jack shaft in a big factory with a big wide flat belts, because I don't have the geared. It's not geared, the flywheel. It runs on a belt.
Oh, okay.
So these guys, there's 6 V belts on there that run it.
Oh, wow.
Which makes it quieter.
Right.
But yeah, you're looking at 100, 110 plus year old hammer that works probably as well today as it did then. And
That's
it has
crazy.
seen some work.
They really built things to last.
Yeah, no joke. And there you can see some oil. That's the drip system that oils the ram and the slides.
Right.
Call that post-nasal drip. Okay, we've got the Damascus steel we made under the big hammer and the press. I've shaped it into roughly a sword-shaped object. Now I want to widen it. So I'm going to use the hammer to stretch out the bevels.
Okay.
Which basically forging the grind in. At least limiting the amount of grinding I have to do.
Right.
But also widening the material. So the dies...
It's going to give you that taper and basically the profile of the blade.
Exactly.
Okay.
So these dies are rounded, so they're going to stretch metal this way. If you come in like this, it's just going to make it longer. It's not going to widen it that much. But if I come in on this side, it's going to widen the blade. So it'll stretch the metal left and right.
Okay.
And that's how I'm going to get the rough shape of the sword done.
Okay.
And then I'll go over to
This should be pretty cool.
Yeah, and then I'll go over to the forge and show you how the little hammer works.
All right.
So you can see how it's slowly widening out the blade.
Yes.
And I will leave that edge relatively thick because I want some space for grinding. But that's how you widen the blade.
And if I'm not mistaken, with Damascus, you also want to leave thickness so that you can cross-cut more of the pattern.
Yes.
And get more figure in the steel.
Yeah, and it depends. If you're doing, say, a hollow grind, that's going to cut deep into the pattern. So you want to leave the thickness so you can expose, especially if it's a twisted pattern. The twisted patterns, as you cut deeper into them, you start getting stars, things like that. You get different patterns develop. So a lot of times you'll leave them really thick, grind deep to expose that pattern.
Right. Yeah.
And it's all a preference.
Right.
You know.
Because every layer in the Damascus is going to truly be unique in its own way because it's hand forged.
Yeah, there's no, I can duplicate a pattern. Every single piece will be different.
Right.
It depends on hammer blows, which distort the material. There's, you can reproduce a pattern, but to get it exactly the same as the last pattern, I don't think it's possible.
Right.
Every piece is different.
Well,
and that's what makes it special.
That's pretty cool. So what happens once you've forged out the bevels on the entire blade? What happens next?
Then we go, it's going to go through different thermal cycling. It's going to go through a heat treating process to soften it and to align the grain structure. So that can involve a lot of time at temperature in a kiln. In slow cooling. Yeah, slow cooling, because you want it preferably buttery soft.
Right.
A lot of blades, I will heat treat them rough forged and then grind, or other times, but they all get thermal cycling, so they have to go through that heating process, which is done, at least in this shop, it's done with digitally controlled heat, exact times, temperatures. It's not done in the forge, especially with the alloys I use. They're not very adaptable to that. They need
they're gonna be more temperamental.
Yeah, they need very specific times and temperatures. So we go through this whole heat treating process to make it soft, and to even out the grain structure. because forging in a lot of ways can screw up your grain structure. It can wreck things.
Okay.
The heat treating after that, that's not the hardening part, but it's still a heat treat. You're fixing what you screwed up forging it.
Right, and I also imagine forging, no two hammer blows are going to be exactly the same or aligned, so you're going to be introducing uneven stresses.
All over the place.
Right.
Yeah. And that's where that heat treating stage prior to hardening, which is a heat treating as well, so it's kind of
right.
Weird. But that stage is very important.
So does that stage just effectively erase everything
Yes.
that's been put into the steel?
Exactly.
And you just maintain the shape?
Yeah, maintain the shape, fix the grain structure that you screwed up in that forge and under this hammer. Same thing industry does. They've been doing it for 100 years plus, accurately. Fix that, then you go to the hardening process. Then in my case, in a lot of cases, I'll take it from rough forge like this, right to the grinder.
Well, could we see you grind on a blade?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, what exactly are we doing here? What are the steps involved with this?
This sword has been rough forged, heat treated, so it's fully hard. I'm going to carefully grind it. You're going to be careful not to overheat it, so there'll be a lot of dunks in the quench tank. Keep it cool.
Okay.
All those are fresh belt, so it'll cut relatively cool. And now we're going to turn this thing into an actual sword.
Okay, and this would be, with the wheel, this would be hollow grinding.
Yeah, first there's a central fuller
Okay.
down the center of this blade. So I'm going to grind the fuller in, and then the edges will be flat ground, so your bevels will be flat.
Okay.
Then we go over to this machine to do that. So first I'll rough in the fuller, then go to this machine to rough in the bevels.
Okay.
And other than that, it's ready to go.
So, I noticed your fuller is going all the way into the tang.
Yes.
I'm used to seeing in movies and TV that the fuller stops before the guard. So how come you're grinding back into the tang?
Traditionally, when they did them, material was expensive, labor was cheap. So sword steel, very precious commodity. They forged that fuller in. This one's actually rough forged in. It's not, they probably did it even cleaner than I did it here. But they would forge that. If you stop early, well, you can't widen anything out.
Okay.
So they forged that typically, not always, sometimes they ground them in, but they always ran it into the tang. So if you look at traditional ancient swords, Viking age, even Roman, you see the fullers, you see the gap that fits the guard.
Right.
There's usually a gap there, and that's because the fuller runs into the tang.
Okay.
And they did it basically to widen the whole piece out. So you're forging the fuller in, you're also forging it into the tang. And from a lot of examples I've seen, yeah, they forged them in.
So does that affect the strength of the tang blade joint at all?
I don't think so. I think in a lot of cases, you see on 1980s B movies and stuff like that, you see the different swords and they have a ricasso, which is standard on modern knives, but wasn't standard a long time ago.
Right.
You'll see some of the ancient Roman stuff will have a ricasso, ancient Celtic, Dark Age stuff sometimes has a ricasso. Most of them do not. So they weren't too concerned with their fit up as far as the guard and blade made up was. I mean, they did fantastic jobs. You go to the Renaissance and you see like a main gouge or a left-hand dagger used in conjunction with a rapier. And their fit-ups are as good as modern-day master smiths in the ABS.
Oh, wow.
So it varies.
Right. So we both know this is a fuller, but a lot of people call it a blood groove. What do you have to say about the concept of a blood groove? What does the fuller actually do?
The fuller blood groove, what a joke, not true. Sorry. It gives you a wider blade, a lighter blade. It acts like an I-beam.
So it adds rigidity as well.
Well, it doesn't add rigidity, but you don't lose any rigidity because of it. So your rigidity flex on the blade is determined by the cross section. So if you remove that center part, doesn't matter. All you've done is reduce weight.
Okay.
And that's why most people have the misconception that a medieval sword weighed 5, 6 pounds, 10 pounds, 14 pounds, whatever.
I think everybody was Conan the Barbarian.
Exactly. And in reality, they weighed about 2.5 pounds. It's like holding a nice fly rod or a tennis racket.
Okay.
They were not heavy. And even the heavy ones are not heavy.
Right. Well, I imagine most modern day men can't hold a gallon of milk out for hours on end. So, and that's 8 pounds. So the idea of fighting all day with an 8-pound sword, they would be gassed out.
Not going to happen. They're going to be gassed in minutes.
But a 2-pound sword, swinging that around
all day long.
Right.
It's like a golf club.
Okay. So if you can play golf, you can sword fight.
Yes. So no, but the fuller just reduces weight. So other than lightening the blade, yeah, the fuller can show off some patterns. Depends on what kind of pattern in your steel you have. But it really was there as a weight reduction method and to conserve on material.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm assuming from here you would do a bunch of grinding to refine your fuller.
Yes.
Or do you move on to the bevels first?
I'm going to move on to, from this is rough ground in a 50 grit belt. It's going to go up to a 400 eventually. But right now I'm going to grind the bevels.
Okay.
Kind of establish where the fuller and everything is. Tweak it a little bit and just keep moving down the blade until it's done.
All right.
So off to the flat grinder.
Look forward
next.
to it. All right.
Cool. Got to go to water. Cool it down. So you can see how the fuller looks all wonky and everything.
Yeah.
That's a matter of just going back over that, grinding more out. Just take it little steps at a time.
May I show the blade to the camera?
Yeah, of course, please. I think it's cool enough.
That's pretty cool. So you wanted to tune up the fuller a little
I'm
bit?
going to tune up the fuller real quick, just to straighten it, and then I think we should do an etch on it.
Okay.
Kind of show the pattern, get an idea of what that thing actually looks like under the bright shiny.
I'd love to see that. With the etch, what are we etching the blade with?
We're going to use, it's a base actually, not an acid as far as I understand it. It's ferric chloride, which is used for printed circuit etching, where it etches the copper away on printed circuit boards, wherever they don't put a resist or a wax on.
Right.
Same stuff. And ferric chloride responds really well to these alloys. The 52100 and L6. 52100 will turn blackish, kind of more of a dark gray.
Okay.
L6 will stay bright and shiny. So that way we'll be able to see the layers.
It's going to give you a real nice contrast. Then.
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
and the longer you leave it in, the deeper it's going to etch.
And that'll give you your topographical texture.
Yeah, and if you etch it long enough, you'll be able to feel the layers, the actual topography of that steel with your fingernail if you run it across.
Now, do you dilute the ferric chloride with anything?
This is a 4-to-1 mix. So
Okay.
I buy standard printed circuit etchant. This tank holds about 5 gallons, maybe a little more than that. I use 1 gallon to close to or a little over 5 gallons of water.
Okay, now would it be like tap water or distilled water?
I've tried both. I just stick with tap.
Okay.
And the water out here in this area is extremely hard. Doesn't seem to affect anything.
Okay.
So I just stick with tap.
Well, that's good to know.
Yeah, and I'm sure from place to place it's going to vary depending on your water quality.
Right.
But these tanks, I haven't changed this one out other than add some fresh ferric chloride in probably 5 years.
Oh,
And
wow.
It still works well.
So it holds its etching ability.
Yeah, it does.
Okay, that's good.
Doesn't cut down that much. So now this is just a rough etch so we can see what kind of a pattern is in this blade.
All right.
Because right now it's bright and shiny and you don't see anything. So we'll put it in the acid for a couple minutes, pull it out, neutralize it, and take a look at it.
All right. Sounds awesome.
And there we have it.
5 minutes later.
There we have. We can see the rough pattern.
Oh, wow.
Now we'll neutralize this. So when it gets stained by acid or base.
And what do you use to neutralize it?
This is a mix of baking soda, water, and trisodium phosphate.
Okay.
I think baking soda will do the same job, but the TSP will also neutralize ferric chloride, so I put it in there.
And it just really just needs a rinse, or does it have to soak for some time?
No, short period of time, because it's really surface level. So I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah, I can see it.
That's cool. Appears like magic.
Yeah, that's how Damascus gets its color.
Very nice.
Just takes a little acid bath. If you polished it to an extremely high degree, you can still see it, like the Japanese swords.
Right.
They're the same laminate type of structure. This is a simple, what I call a random ladder pattern, because my hammer dies actually make ladder pattern in it.
Right.
But the Japanese swords, they polish them to such a high degree, you don't even need the acid to see the pattern.
Right.
Because it's just a ridiculously high level of polish, and the pattern will come out. Based on samples they've done of medieval Viking swords, looks like maybe-ish they were polished to about 400 grit.
Oh, okay.
And they probably did use acid, maybe.
Right.
Vinegar will do it,
Right.
just to show the pattern a little bit. It lets you see it's rather than a bright, shiny blade. Yeah, it's a bright, shiny blade, but you look closely at it, you'll see the pattern.
Right. I imagine to get a bold etch with vinegar, it would take a very long time.
Yeah, it's one of those overnight soaks.
Right.
The ferric chloride just does a better job at it. If I'm doing stainless steel Damascus, then I'm using muriatic acid, much stronger,
Right.
and it takes a minute. It needs to be warmed up,
Right.
to 100 and some degrees, just to get it to really bite into
Right.
the steel. But for carbon steel, which all my swords are made out of, and most of my knives, ferric chloride just does a fantastic job, and it really differentiates the color.
Right.
Of
Yeah,
the
it'll
two
give you a
steels.
lot of contrast.
Yeah, exactly.
We first forged the Damascus and then shaped the blade. Then the heat treating and thermal cycling, and then the hardening and tempering portion of the heat treating. And then you grind. And
I
then-
grind hard,
Right.
typically.
And then once this blade would be completely ground out, do you typically sell just the blade, or do you finish out a complete sword, or do you do both? I mean, where is your market mostly at?
I do both. I do a lot of finished completed blades, which I'm constantly trying to keep up with on orders. I don't do custom blades. I do basically what I want to make and then put it out there for sale. But I do a lot of bare blades for other vendors that do hilt work.
Okay.
So there are a lot of my blades out there that the hilt isn't mine, but the blade is, and the blade's like marked with my KC overlaid C logo. So I have a lot of those out there, and that's
Okay.
a good chunk of my customers, and the other chunk is completed blades.
Now, I have a question. Maybe you do, maybe you don't have one you could show. But do you have a blade that's heat treated and ready that you can show us how impressively these blades can flex and take a punishment?
Yes, I do. I'm gonna have to go find one. I've got a test blade that's it's one I use. I cut steel with it, and it's a very lightweight sword, but it's just a bare blade.
You
So
cut
it's not
s-
finished.
you
Yeah, I
cut steel with
it
it.
cuts steel. But I do have a test blade. We could show some flexibility and things
Okay.
like that.
That would be awesome. Thank you.
Huh?
All right, so what are you going to be showing us here?
This is a Damascus patterned sword. It had a problem with the tang, so I use it as a demonstration piece. It's a bit rusted and everything. This particular steel is 01L6 with my bainite heat treatment. Historically, it's correct as far as dimensions. This really is what swords weighed.
Okay, so before you do anything here, please everyone, do not do this at home. He is a trained professional. Should anything go wrong with either the work that's been done to the blade or the technique that's being used, it could lead to a severe injury. So please do not do this at home.
I would double up on that. Especially don't do it at home. Most swords do not have the proper geometry to do this. This sword flexes, yes, which you can see I've turned it into about 120 degrees. It comes back straight. Multiple times, both directions. Also, the edge is about 12 thousandths of an inch thick, so it's relatively thin. It hasn't been sharpened. Sharp enough to cut, but it's still a very thin edge. So you can see I'm going to smack it into this steel drift anvil I have, and it will cut right into the steel. Harder steel cuts softer steel, and it has zero deformation. I can do that again.
That's crazy.
So it's not magic, it's just hard steel cuts soft steel. This can handle a lot of flex, as did the originals. The original swords could do this. Not every blade design is designed to handle that kind of flex. If I had a very stiff longsword with a high median ridge, it is not going to flex like that, and they will break. So every sword was designed, it was designed for a purpose. This one's just a good example to show heat treatment. A lot of people say edge geometry is more important than heat treatment. I would say both. You need the edge geometry, but if your heat treatment's wrong and I do this to it, it's going to stay that way if it's not hardened properly.
So what happens during heat treat? What change in the blade happens that allows it to bend to such an extreme and return straight?
Heat treatment is what's going to give its resilience. So you get into what's called the, this right now, what you're seeing is the elastic state. Like a elastic, the band on your underwear, it's elastic. It stretches, comes back to its original position. Then you have the plastic state. The plastic state is once you, roughly, once you exceed the elastic limit, you get into the plastic limit. And once you hit plastic, it will stay deformed. This blade obviously did not hit the plastic state. It stayed in its elastic state. Depending on hardness, depending on alloys, depending on edge geometry, you can hit that plastic state and go a little further, and you can bend that thing and it'll stay bent but still be hard. Or you could hit that plastic state and it explodes. So there's a very narrow window from elastic to plastic. And in this case, sword's very elastic. So it comes back dead straight. And part of that also, yes, is the heat treatment, but also the edge geometry. This is a very thin blade. Most people don't realize how thin swords really work. So it's really kind of a parlor trick. You know, it's a lot of swords will do this and not suffer any consequences. Thicker swords, less chance of doing this. So it is both heat treatment and edge geometry that causes it.
That's pretty cool. Now we just don't need everybody to think that they're plastic so they don't get replaced with paper swords.
Yes, no, for sure. Don't do that.
All right, everybody. Well, I would like to welcome you to In the Shop. This is our series on different knife makers and their shops, and we are here with KC Lund. KC, thank you for allowing us to invade your space here.
Of course.
Hopefully we don't take up too much of your time, but I've got a lot of questions I'd like to ask you, and I'd like to understand everything you do here.
Okay, feel free. I'll try.
First, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your history, what brought you to this point?
I was a 16-year-old kid, just got my driver's license, and was hanging out at the mall. We used to do that in the 80s. And went to a shop called Advanced Cutlery.
I remember Advanced Cutlery.
Yeah, in Cerritos Mall in Southern California. And I saw a flyer for this Pasadena custom knife show. I'm like, ooh, what's that? So I went, buddy and I, my friend Paul, still friends today. This would have been probably 1988.
Okay.
87, 88, somewhere around there. And went to the knife show, saw stuff I'd never seen before. You know,
Right.
I'd seen some pattern weld, or at that time, everyone called it Damascus.
Right.
Pattern weld's more of an accurate term, I think. But yeah, it's Damascus. So I'm looking at all these Damascus everywhere. I'm like, wow, this is great. And there was big scary man, Jim Hrisoulas. And he was there. I was intimidated. I'm like, oh God, this guy, big, burly bladesmith. And he had made a book called The Complete Bladesmith, and he was signing and autographing and everything. I really wanted that book. So I emptied my bank account, what little I had in there, to buy that book. I think at that time it was like $80, you know,
Right.
it was big money back then. So I bought that book, and I started from there, and it just kept building and building and building. So I was a teenager doing it.
So I have that same book. I have to ask you a question.
Yes.
Because that book is famous for one thing, the concept of edge packing. How long did you believe in edge packing before?
A very long time. I think it was, it's misunderstood. I think now you can do the exact same effect with thermal cycling,
Right.
heating, cooling, heating, cooling. When the grains in the steel start growing, then you stop them. Then new grains start forming when you heat it up again. New grains start forming on the old grain boundaries, which causes...
Right.
So the edge packing isn't necessarily wrong.
Just
The
presented.
mechanics, the mechanics of it are not accurate. Hammering it does nothing. It's a heat, cool, heat, cool, heat,
Right.
cool, causes those grains to get smaller.
Right.
So the exact same thing as if you're edge packing. You're heating it up, you're going over the hammer, you're cooling it.
Right.
So I think for probably hundreds and who knows, maybe 1,000, 2,000 years, people thought that's what was doing it. Well,
Right.
really it was the heat and cool
Right.
that did it. But it works.
Right. It's just
It's
just funny the controversy that there is over it when everybody's like, no, you don't pack the edge, does nothing.
You're not, unless you do a 50% reduction, like with this hammer.
Right.
You could do it with this. You're not going to fracture grains,
Right.
but you can make them smaller by thermal cycling correctly.
Yeah.
So
with that show, that lit your fire, got you started, and that was the expo, right? Knife Expo.
no, it was, it might have been actually. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it was Knife Expo in Pasadena,
Yep.
California. That lit my fire. My parents were okay with me building fires and doing dangerous things in the backyard. So my first forge was based on Jim's book. It was I got coal. I could drive now, so I had my truck. I went and got coal locally. There was someone sold blacksmith's coal.
Right.
And so I got a big 100-pound bag of blacksmith's coal. My neighbor, who was a mechanic, he gave me a big blower motor. I dug a trench in the dirt, built this brick pile. It was a cinder block actually, and then this brake drum was literally a brake drum from a truck.
Right.
Sat on there, and it had small enough holes in it where the coal wouldn't fall through. And I used bricks on this trough that I dug in the dirt for the fan to blow. And there was my first coal forge. And the first thing I did was make Damascus. I didn't even try forging anything. I tried when I was younger hammering on rebar and things like that.
Right.
I was just absolutely addicted to the fire and hitting steel.
Yeah, I can understand it completely. So, did you just move forward with Damascus and making, and with the intention of that being a career, or did you do what most people do and go out and get a real job and do the daily grind?
I should say, unfortunately, I had to get a real job as I got older. I was selling the bar stock. I was making just Damascus bar stock, and I was selling that to other knife makers. So I would go to the California Knife Makers Association meetings,
Right.
which I'm still a member of today, as are you, I
Yeah.
think. Yeah. So, and people would hit me up like I was some crack dealer. They're like, hey, do you have any, you got any steel?
Right.
So I had a tailgate full of all these bars of steel, and I would get all this money. I'd leave the meetings with like hundreds of dollars, and I'm a teenager at the time, and I was like, oh, I just reinvest that in the business, and I just kept building it that way.
Okay, so what did you end up doing for your day job then?
I ended up followed my dad's footsteps. Actually, my dad was a police officer.
Oh, okay.
And I tested. It took quite a while. Back in the early 90s, it was not easy to get hired.
Right.
So Riverside County Sheriff's Department picked me up. And my initial goal was to be a patrol deputy. I wanted to do that. Ended up staying in corrections my entire career. So yeah, I did 26 plus years of jail.
Oh, wow.
A good experience, good and bad, but it allowed for me to do all of this that I'm doing now.
Right, and obviously, because you've got a beautiful shop here.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
With the Damascus steel, the show got you started on that. What steered you to making swords? I mean, where did that, because most people go into knives, you know, because it's easier, less equipment, you know, you can go to any cutlery shop and find reference material, but swords, Hollywood and pop culture really kind of twist that up, and it's a lot harder to find accurate source material. So what took you that direction?
From the beginning, when I was making Damascus, I wanted to make swords. I was a teenager that was into 1980s B movies, you know, from Conan, Beastmaster. Oh, I want a sword. And I tried right from the beginning, before I even made knives. I'm like, nope, I'm gonna make a sword. Yeah, big fail. Not the way to go. But it was just always what I wanted to do. And it wasn't until, you know, I made swords, sword-like objects, and it wasn't until I actually got to handle real pieces, like museum pieces, real private collections, and also over in Germany and Italy, I've seen real swords. Until you see one in the 3D, not from a book, not from just pictures, but when you actually see one, it's like, oh, that's how they made them.
Right.
And they're much lighter, thinner than you'd think. So it's, you know, I'm really into making accurate medieval. I like Roman stuff. I'm a history nut. So that's probably what drove the sword thing, along with the movies over the years.
Yeah, because, I mean, what knife maker isn't into Conan, Beastmaster, Highlander?
Oh,
God, yeah.
Highlander, come on.
Right?
Lots of BS and all of it.
Yep.
but
we love it anyways.
I should have mentioned Highlander when I said Beastmaster and Conan, but it was Highlander. It was like, oh my God.
Because that's swords in the modern day.
Yes.
You know, what knife guy doesn't want to run around? You know, Highlander for us is what The Walking Dead is for the current generation.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, swords have been my thing. I do a lot of Renaissance fairs with my vendor, and I'm there at Govanen's Forge. So we're usually, whenever he's local, which usually is, he does most of California, but any of the local places around here, I always try to make it there, because that way I can talk with people and put one in their hands, and then when they pick it up, you see their eyes bulge, and they're like, oh my God, I didn't know. You know, it feels like a fishing rod or a tennis racket in their hands. So I like doing that. I like to talk to customers, potential customers, or if they're not customers, I still like to talk to people and talk about swords.
Awesome. For our audience, what kind of education is involved in doing this? Is it like a college program? You know, is it a structured education process, or is it more an apprenticeship, or is it a more just go out? You know, how do you get educated on this?
Now, with the internet and the available stuff out there on YouTube and all the different things, there's a lot more education you can get than was available when I started. I mean, my education source was Jim Hrisoulas' books or the library on blacksmithing. And blacksmithing and bladesmithing are two different things.
Right.
I always joke and I said, you know, when I want to get humbled, I watch, you know, with my forge working on my hammer and working on this. Now I watch a real blacksmith do something and I'm like, ugh, I suck.
Yeah.
But my specialty with blade making, smithing, the specialty really is in heat treating. So education is important. Some classes in metallurgy would definitely help, which I have taken. And I wasn't even interested in heat treating until I started playing with molten salt pots. Like, it would have been around 97, 98. And then I found out I didn't know what I thought I didn't know what I didn't know. So I went deep dive into metallurgy. My college my focus was on advanced aerospace TIG welding. So I can weld. That's an important one to have because I use it almost daily in the shop. TIG welding, stick welding. If you want to build machines like that, you need to know how to weld.
Right.
And use machine tools. So there's that education, which can encompass your entire life because I learn something new every day.
Yep. And, you know, this kind of a trait, I imagine you're a jack of all trades for sure, and a master of some of them, and just really good at the rest.
Well, you know, and I can thank my dad for being able to build something like this. I mean, I subbed this portion of the shop, I subbed out. My dad and I built the other one 20 some years ago. The electrical, all of that's mine. I do it, I know how to do it. That's another aspect. If you're gonna put big machine tools in,
Right.
you probably should learn how to do some electrical work.
So you can wire them up.
Yeah, exactly.
Most knife makers, sword makers, even going into other traits like the different arts out there, everybody's got mentors. Tell us a little bit about your mentors or teachers.
God, I got to give shout out to Jim Hrisoulas. He was the first, and he wrote the books.
Right.
Then I became, especially he's a retired law enforcement, prior military. I just talked to him a few months ago. Great guy.
Oh.
Yeah, so
Awesome.
I still keep in touch with him. So that was he's the initial that got me started and ruined me for life. And then friends I made through Cal Knives, Jim Ferguson, who used to own Twisted Nickel Damascus.
Right.
Jim and he lived locally by me when I lived in Downey, California.
Oh, okay.
He was literally down the street, and I never knew.
Oh, wow.
And here he was making Damascus steel at his shop in
Right.
Southgate. So my friend David Burnetta, he lives in Hawaii now. I've got a ton, and a lot came from Cal Knives. So it's nice to get involved
Right.
with a local organization, because you meet people and
Pick up
sometimes-
different traits.
Absolutely, and you learn, even if you learn how not to do it, you still learn something.
Right.
You
Right.
learn not to do that.
Well, and there's except when you get into the really scientific aspect, there's multiple ways to do things. And sometimes learning a few different ways to do the same thing allows you to come up with your own way that works for you.
Exactly, and when I do, I forgot Tony Swatton.
Oh, yes.
Tony Swatton, he does most of the swords and knives and armor for the movies.
Right.
So, I don't know, 300 plus film credits, where
Wow.
he's making all that stuff, and I've learned a lot from him over the years. I delved more into the metallurgy side of things, but God, it's just too numerous to.
Right.
There's too many, and there are some though that I'm very close with still. And you learn something new every day.
If you had to convey to someone that you specialized in something, what aspect of what you do would you call your specialty?
Damascus steel making and sword making. I mean,
Okay.
I make knives, lots of knives.
Right.
But my specialty really is in mostly Western European swords. That's
Okay.
what I do, and Damascus steel. Maybe add in heat treating. That's my
Heat
thing.
treating, yeah.
That is one of my things.
You're the guy I always call first with heat treating questions.
Yeah.
None of us have a smooth ride on our way to mastering our skills. What were some of your biggest challenges?
Making swords. Getting the right equipment. That's a huge thing. If you're not set up for doing certain things, you're just not going to get, from point A to point B easily. There's, from grinders, hammers, just learning or getting all that equipment together, which has taken me over 30 years
Right.
to compound what I have here now. And the learning curve is steep.
Right.
So especially with big equipment.
Like you said earlier, you don't know what you don't know, and you could end up spending a good chunk of money on a piece of equipment that could end up just being total trash.
Absolutely. And like you said, you don't know what you don't know. I mean, that's pretty much it. So when you're starting something like this, some guys are starting out small and they're learning. That's how you progress. It just takes time.
So if you were to give somebody who wanted to get into this some advice about acquiring equipment early on, what would you tell them? What's the best way for them to get their feet wet and not kill themselves financially?
I would say, well, it helps if you know how to weld.
Okay.
One of the presses over there I built when I was 19 years old, or 18 actually, I think, when I built that. So that would have been 1991. I built that, I still use it today. I built that with a drill press, a little buzz box, stick welder, and a oxyacetylene torch.
Wow.
So I had to learn how to use all that.
You were in the dark ages.
Yeah, and but I was in welding in junior college.
Right.
So it's like, oh, I can do this. So I did it. So learn how to build your own equipment if you can. There's so many available things. Like if you're into forging, I would say the first thing you can get your hands on would be a hydraulic press.
Okay.
You can do so much with it. Before I got, Mjolnir, I call it Mjolnir. I did everything on that 40-ton press. And
Okay.
that's another one I built back in, I think, 96,
Oh, okay.
97. So,
With you, you built all this, and it's freaking amazing. I know you've got to have an end goal. What is your end goal? Where does all this lead? When you finally put down your hammer, what do you want to see around you and behind you with your Damascus and swords?
it'd be nice to leave a little bit of a legacy for the kids. I mean, my son and daughter aren't too interested in this, and they're teenagers now, so.
Right, and that could change.
That could change. Just to live a comfortable life. I'm retired from the sheriff's department, so I have an income.
Right.
But this supplements it. And I wanted to do this full time, but now that I'm doing it full time, it's a lot of work
Oh, yeah.
and stressful at times. You got to feed the beast.
You got to feed the beast, and you never know. It's not like when you work a 9-to-5 job where every 2 weeks, every week, every month, however you get paid, there's going to be money there.
Right.
It can be feast or famine.
It's up and down.
Yep.
And my idea, though, is just to keep plugging away. I don't know if I'll ever put down the hammer, unless I can't hold it.
Yeah.
But as of right now, I'm young. I'm still young, relatively speaking, I guess. Hopefully, I got another 20 in me or more, and just keep learning more and keep going.
All right. So now I want to move on to the subject of Damascus steel. What exactly is Damascus steel?
Well, Damascus steel, some people will try to correct you when you say it's Damascus. Okay, well, it's patterned steel. It's laminated steel. It's two different types of steels or irons welded to each other. It's as old as iron working. To make little pieces of iron or steel into big pieces, to make things like swords, axes, tools, you take all these little pieces that you smelted, you forge weld them together. And if the atmosphere in the furnace is right, flux, there's a lot of variables, but if the stuff sticks together. And that over time was developed into this laminate that was then manipulated to show off patterns, cool patterns. And these guys knew what they were doing. If you look at some of the Roman age finds, like Europa in I believe Denmark or Gotland, I think Denmark, they have tiled mosaic, very complex patterns and stuff that's almost 2,000 years old.
Wow.
And I'm scratching my head today when I see some of the patterns, like, how did they do that?
I scratch my head every day. We were just at Blade Show West in Salt Lake City, and I look at some of the Damascus patterns, and the basics like ladder and twist and raindrop, I completely get how those patterns are manipulated to do what they're doing, but some of the stuff they come up with, and I know they make different components and break them down and put them back together in specific ways, but then you see like the tiled mosaics. It's like, how do you even begin to do that? So it's always fascinated me because it seems like the sky's the limit.
It is. You see there's so many talented makers out there that are specializing in these crazy patterns. I have not gone that route. I mean, I know how some of them are made. What I'm making mostly is a lot of my customers, they want a Damascus sword. So they don't necessarily want to, they're going to pay a premium for a Damascus sword.
Right. It's a
Or
handmade
knife.
steel.
Yeah. But they don't necessarily want to pay that extra to go with, say, a classic Viking sword or Anglo-Saxon sword where it's multiple bars of twisted steel welded back to itself, and then the edge steel is welded around that. Very difficult. I would call that one of the pinnacles of sword making. Very difficult to do. The Roman blades were done that way as well.
And that would be what's called a composite blade.
Yeah, I would call it a multi-bar composite. I think that's more accurate, or best descriptor. So you got multiple bars all welded together. The steel for the edge, back in those days, they would use, for the core of the blade, they would use a coarser, lower grade iron steel to make the core, and then the more refined high-end edge steel would be wrapped around the blade. Conserves on, I think, it would conserve on very expensive materials at the time. Back then, labor was cheap.
Right.
Materials were expensive,
right.
And precious. So, at least, and also I think we call it in the Renaissance Fair stuff, we call it warrior bling.
Yeah, right.
The more elaborate your pattern, the more expensive that sword is.
Yeah.
But not everyone wants that. They just want, oh, okay, it's pattern welded. So I focus more on a lot of my straight, what I call random ladder, I call it. Because
Right.
just the way the hammers hit
Right.
causes that deformation in the layers. So that's mostly what I do. I don't have a big call. Me personally, I don't have a big call for mosaics and crazy patterns. So
Right.
I've never really delved too deep into it.
Yeah, like one of my favorite patterns on the fancier side of the basic patterns, but it's not as elaborate as mosaic, and that's Turkish twist.
Oh, that actually is my favorite.
Yeah.
It's amazing when you look at a lot of it's all over the place, all over Europe, Turkey, everywhere. Old Damascus shotgun barrels.
Right.
I've examined a lot of those, and you look at the patterns, and it's like, wow.
Yeah.
These guys were making perfect welds on a tube of multiple bars of twisted steel spiraling down the barrels. They're fantastic, and they were doing that for hundreds of years. So it's not really a lost process.
Right.
It's just revitalized, I think.
Yeah.
Now.
Well, and it's something from the past that can be represented in a lot of different ways now than it would have been back then.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, what were the historical benefits to Damascus steel?
I think if you go back in history, as I had said earlier, the only way to make a big bar of steel was to take a bunch of little bars and forge weld it together. Then someone, smarter than me probably, figured out that you could see the layers and patterns in it. And the historical benefit, though, was you're taking different grades of iron and steel, you're forging them together, you're cleaning them because they're dirty.
Right.
They're full of silica and all kinds of garbage from the charcoal fire that they were working at the time. Coal didn't start getting used until way later. And you would have to refine that steel by folding it over and over. If you watch Japanese swords,
Right.
they're made the same way. A lot of different construction methods, but it's the same thing. They're taking this garbage, spongy iron and steel, forging it together. I don't know if they knew it back then, but what they're doing, that carbon migrates and homogenizes.
Right.
So you would refine the steel that way. So that's the main benefit is, you're folding it, and then someone brilliant figured, hey, if I manipulate this by twisting it, some of the old Celtic blades, that straight laminate,
Right.
like a plywood on edge.
Right.
And they figured that would give different strengths. And you have different dissimilar metals welded together, they're going to perform somewhat differently. Look at some of the Viking swords that have not engravings, but forged in names and things like
Right.
that. That was done with high phosphorus iron, and that high phosphorus etches out white. They knew exactly what they were working with, I think.
So many people confuse Damascus with lamination, with folding, pattern welding. These are all different but similar things. Would you care to explain some of the differences so people could understand? Because a lot of times once they think it's been folded, it's Damascus.
Well, in a way, if it's a laminate, I think it's safe to call it Damascus, and there'll be some purists out there, no, the original Damascus was Woots.
Right.
Yeah, we call that Damascus too, but in general term, Damascus applies to pattern welded. Just folded is still pattern welded, you're just not manipulating the pattern to a degree that will show, feathers, stars, things like that. Mosaics, that's pattern welded too. It's steel welded to itself, or to another steel. Yeah, it's pattern welded. Your Japanese sword, they have multiple types of construction techniques, but it all starts with folding that steel.
Is there a way to tell if something is fake or real in the world of Damascus?
It's been a long time. I haven't seen any fake stuff show up. There is a method where you could etch what looks like a pattern, but unless you've seen a real Damascus piece, pattern welded, laminate,
right?
When you see the fake one, it's so glaringly obvious that it's not real.
Right.
And there's so much coming in from overseas. Other countries they're making real Damascus. These swords you see for $100, $200. That's real Damascus. That's a laminate. God knows how good the heat treatment or any of that is.
Right,
but it is a laminate.
Right, and that leads me into my next question is, can Damascus be a bad steel?
Absolutely, you can have weld flaws. That could cause failure. If the person forging it doesn't know how to do the proper thermal cycling, and that could screw up any steel. I mean, if you don't do that
and I imagine that
you can wreck it.
Just even the steel selection you make for the piece could make it good or bad.
Huge. You have there's so many thousands of steels out there of all different grades designed to do certain things, like AEBL stainless steel. It's a Swedish steel. It was designed for one specific purpose, and that was for razor blades.
Right.
It was designed to take a very fine edge with no primary carbides in it. And that steel does exactly what it's supposed to do, but you wouldn't want to mix it with a carbon steel. It's got different heat treating properties.
Right.
You have to AEBL, you got to heat up to almost 2,000 degrees. Mix it with like O1 or L6 that I'm using, that I was just forging on. They're not compatible.
Right.
So you go to harden it, you blasted one steel, the L6, it uses a lower temperature to harden. AEBL is at a way higher temperature. So now you just ruined the L6 that's mixed with your AEBL.
Right.
So you need compatible steels. And, certain people do different alloy combinations. Most common right now, I think, is 1084 and 15N20.
Right.
And makes a great blade. I go with the richer steels, 01, L6, 5200,
right.
L6. Those are my mix.
And so people understand they're steels that are tailored to specific jobs. So like 1084, that's a carbon tool steel, right?
High carbon steel.
High carbon,
Yeah,
okay, just a
not
high
a tool
carbon,
steel.
okay.
Right.
And then the 15N20, that's most commonly used in bandsaw blades.
Big, giant bandsaw blades.
Right.
Another steel made in Sweden.
Right.
By Udalholm or Vostoppine.
So if you were to tell our viewers any one thing about Damascus that they should know, what would it be?
It's fun to make. It's also, it's a struggle.
Right.
As you start making it, you find out what you end up with, equipment-wise, to be able to make it efficiently.
So in a sense, it would be maybe to understand when they're buying a product for Damascus, there's a reason it's more expensive than a non-Damascus version.
I think it showcases the effort and the knowledge that went into making that. To be able to make your own, make a sword out of it, or knife, either way, it just shows a level of, okay, this person's competent.
Right.
Hopefully. So, as far as performance-wise, I wouldn't say it's better. I think when you mix certain compatible alloys together, like a 1L6, I think, my personal opinion, combined, they behave differently than each of the parent metals. They
Right.
kind of become a little unique, and they perform.
So Damascus, in a way, could have been a primitive version of alloying.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you're forge welding, you're laminating, you're dispersing whatever's in that steel. The carbon is moving, homogenizing, but you still get to see the patterns. And so, yeah, in a way, it's kind of like alloying, just short of melting the actual stuff together.
Right.
Because you're never taking it to a
molten
state.
Right.
No, never.
I want to ask you, because I've heard so many things, and I'm sure you've heard much more than me, so I really want to hear your take on it. There's a lot of myths. What do you think is probably the most common myth about Damascus?
Well, that it's superior to any other blade, steel.
Okay.
I don't necessarily think that's true. Myths are I shouldn't say myth. The saying for years has been hard and soft layers.
Right.
Kinda. Depends on the alloys you're working with. If you were laminating, say, 1084, just basic high carbon steel that bladesmiths really like, and
right.
It's nice working steel. Mix that with nickel. Nickel won't harden.
Right.
You'll get pretty bright lines and dark lines, and you'll get that. And you will get a micro serration effect. I think Larry Thomas did an article on that.
Where the nickel crosses the edge,
yeah,
it's going to wear away faster.
Exactly. So you're going to get that micro serrations. Whether that's the case with what we're doing with modern alloys, I don't know if that's so much true. Maybe on a microscopic level, really small level.
Right.
It might be. So that's a myth, though. When you take, even if you take wrought iron, forge weld it with a high carbon tool steel or steel, tool steel too, that carbon's going to migrate at those high temperatures. You know, when you're at 2300 degrees Fahrenheit, that carbon will migrate into that wrought iron. So eventually, you're changing the composition of both. You might have some hard and soft layers, but I think that's the biggest myth.
Okay. Now, for the last one, this is kind of a fun question I like to ask people, because all of us who work in the world of blades, we've all been exposed to some really weird people. Do you have any crazy stories that you would like to share? Maybe some that lean a little more to the Damascus. I know you work the Renaissance fairs and the festivals.
Yeah.
And I can only imagine what some of those people, I mean, a lot of them are very intelligent and they understand the history. And then a lot of them, they can't separate that from Dungeons and Dragons. So give us a crazy story you've heard about what somebody thinks.
I wouldn't call it crazy. I would call it, I haven't really had any, like, you know, guys stabbing themselves because they're pretending to play with a sword. You know, we've had people cut themselves. It happens because the first thing they do is it's sharp, and then they run their finger on the edge, and you got blood squirting everywhere. So as you can attest to at any of the knife shows, you go there, and a lot of people have Band-Aids on their table, you know, as a joke, but not because it happens all the time. The Ren fairs have been actually really safe. One story that still irks me to this day, a guy got in an argument with me over Damascus because the edge on this blade was sharpened, and you know, it's bright silver, of, you know, the color of the metal. The rest of the blade, obviously, because it's been etched, exposes the pattern. Well, when you sharpen a knife, a Damascus knife, as you know, it's going to leave a silver mark. And he argued with me that I don't know what I was talking about, and I don't know what Damascus is, because Damascus doesn't do that. It always looks like that. So I found that as it's not a crazy story, but it's an irritating one.
Right.
It's like, yeah, what do I know?
So I actually have a story that involves one of your swords. You know, as our viewers probably don't know, you frequented the cutlery store that I used to work to, and we sold your blades.
Yeah.
Well, there was one day we had these typically 25 and younger people. We called them mall ninjas that would come in, and they were fascinated by our sword wall. And one asked to see one of your Damascus swords that you had in for sale at our store. I showed it to him, and the first thing he does is he took it and looked at it and inspected it, and then straight to the tip on the carpet and kneeled before it, crossed himself, whispered some chant,
Some
stood
incantation.
up with a sharp snap, grabbed the tip, leveled it out, handed it to me, bowed to me, and walked out of the store.
Wow.
That
I take it he didn't buy it.
No, he didn't buy it. But that experience is what actually inspired that question. That is probably the strangest interaction I have had selling. Well, there's one other, but we don't need to talk about it in this video.
Okay.
But that interaction is probably, it's in the top 2 of the strangest interactions I've ever had trying to sell blades.
Yeah, it's that's hilarious. Yeah, it's funny. You would think at Ren Fair there'd be more weird things happening because it's a fun event.
Right.
Everyone's dressed up and
Collects all types of people.
yeah, they're great. And no, it just hasn't been. Other than that argument with the guy on what Damascus steel really was, and I'm looking at him going like, really?
Yeah.
So that gets frustrating, but that's an hilarious story there.
Are you taking any orders?
I take very few custom orders.
Okay.
Typically, I make what I want to make and put it out there, and usually it sells. That was a dream I had back when I was beginning this. I'm like, wow, wouldn't it be great if I could sell everything I make?
Right. We all have that dream.
And then you kind of get there,
Right.
and now it's like, oh God, I can't keep up.
Right.
Then, or you get a custom order. I was never one to take down payments. I didn't like that. No, when it's done, you pay for it, and then you finish it, and they, oh, sorry, I don't have any money.
Right.
So,
Yeah, they want that impulse buy, so they want to get rid of their money, but then they feel like they own you
right.
once they paid you.
Yeah, and they're calling you every week. How's it going? How's it going? I haven't
Right.
even looked at it yet, dude. I'm working on 15 other projects
Right.
before I get to yours. So, yeah, that I occasionally will take 1 or 2, and you're usually from previous customers that I have a good relationship with. As far as custom, they always give me the lead, like, hey, you do, this is roughly what I want. You
They
do
might
what you
just
wanna do.
inject,
Yes.
I'd like to see,
Yes.
here or there.
I've got one right now I'm working on. I've got 30 layers of Damascus started, and it's a piece of Gibeon meteorite. Very nice meteorite,
Right.
little guy. He wants it forged into the blade, and I'm like, I can do that. I've worked more meteorite than I can think of,
Right.
Hundreds of pounds of it over the years. And yeah, so I'm gonna forge it in there. It might not show much in the pattern. It definitely isn't gonna help the Damascus.
Right.
But
And-
he wants the sentimentality of it.
Right, and that's that just made me think. One more question for you. There's all these legends. The first Bowie knife. And Excalibur and whatnot. Does meteorite do anything to improve the quality of a blade?
Tough question. Meteorite, at least the ones I've worked on, like I said, I usually get 9 to 12 pound chunks of Campo di Cielo meteorite that struck Argentina, God
Right.
knows when, scattered everywhere. It's expensive.
Right.
And there's Munjanalusta from Sweden, Finnish border, that was a glacier rolled, and they find it all over the place. It's
Right.
about 3 times more expensive than Campo di Cielo. And then Gibeon, I think is from China, hit somewhere out there. Usually I've never seen a giant piece of it, but extremely expensive stuff. But it is nickel iron. It's iron with anywhere from 7 to maybe 13% nickel. It varies between, God knows each rock you get.
Right.
And it is a chunk of iron. It's heavy. The nickel is a toughness adder.
Right.
I don't know if I said that right. It adds toughness.
Right.
So it can be very difficult to weld together. So how they did it in Malaysia, the Chris blades, they used a lot of, they must have had a bunch of meteor laying around all those years making these crazy wavy blades
Right.
with beautiful patterns. They were able to work it. I think if you work it from the beginning, like when I start, it's welded onto a tool steel plate. I got it sitting there on a plate like a spatula, and then I'll forge it down. I stopped trying to cut it because God knows what's in there, and
Right.
it tears up bandsaw blades. So I just forged the whole thing onto a plate, and once I fold it a few times with the other tool steels I use, it behaves. It starts behaving. So I think it could add contaminants, but if you're going back to antiquity,
They were already
they're already working with it. So it might be cleaner than the stuff they were working with. So maybe it did have a net benefit.
Back then, at least.
Yeah, back then at least.
Yeah.
Modern days,
Now with the super seals we have nowadays, you know,
No,
it's
it's
going to
a
be hard to
detriment.
beat those.
Yeah, it's an absolute, you're adding contaminants into that steel.
Right. Okay, so why don't you tell our viewers how they can find your work, reach out and contact you, maybe even buy something from you.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I'm on Instagram. I'm KC, just the letters, KC _Lund, Lund _Blades. And you can find me there. I try to post as I can. I'm not as good at it as I should be. And also my website is kclundblades.com.
All right. Well, thank
Thanks,
you for
Marshall.
your time and having us here
You
to the
too.
shop. And
Anytime.
I'm looking forward to seeing some of your work.
Yeah.
All right.
Looking forward to it.
Thank you.
It'll be fun.
Marissa and I would like to extend a special thank you to KC Lund for allowing us the time with him in his shop. KC is an expert at making swords in Damascus and has a wealth of information to share with people, which he gladly does at a moment's notice. That's what this show is about. In the Shop is about spending time with masters of their craft, learning the skills they've acquired, the knowledge they have to share, and getting to watch them work, even learning about the process and the tooling that all happens behind the scenes. We all see finely crafted blades at knife shows and on websites, message boards, social media, all over the internet. But we don't always get a picture of what goes on behind the scenes to bring these beautiful creations to life. Thank you, Casey, for this opportunity, and thank you to all of you for watching this video. If you have any questions or want to share any of your thoughts, please leave them in the comments below. If you haven't subscribed to the channel and you want to see more of In the Shop, please subscribe now. We'll be posting new episodes of In the Shop the first Sunday of every month. And until next time, as always, stay sharp, and we'll see you next time in the shop.